Real quick, I just wanted to forewarn listeners that I'm compiling this 2 years after they were originally recorded. So there has been a vast improvement, and I'm sorry for any rough spots these earlier ones have. So I hope you enjoy them as they come. Warning: this podcast frequently mentions violent acts and contains graphic content. Listener discretion advised. Now, get comfy and prepare yourself for another episode of
The Nightmare Society.
Back in 2011, I was with a circle of friends that made it a tradition to go camping at a certain spot every May. Long weekend. The spot we chose was in a beautiful area right on the edge of a large lake and was located on government land. The lake itself had a dam on it, so during May the water levels were always low, if not completely empty, making it possible to walk across it. People were allowed to camp there as long as they weren't causing trouble or making a mess, and it was generally a good time for everyone. The spots themselves were paced far enough apart that you had your own privacy, but not far enough that you couldn't meet other people. In this particular year, our spot was in the middle of a small hill with one campsite below us and one above us. The first night, our trip happened without incident. During the second day, the people staying at the site below us had moved in. We didn't think much of it and continued drinking throughout the day and into the night. At around midnight, the people at the campsite below us were really out of control. They were yelling and screaming, and their music had gotten even louder, so our friend Ben went down to ask them to turn it down. He was promptly punched in the face, and he came back to inform us that he was 90% sure they were on drugs. After that, the vibe wasn't as relaxed as we were all somewhat on edge. I was feeling really tired, so I just decided to go to bed. Some of my friends were still awake, including Ben and one couple, Lily and Derek, that were visiting another campsite we had made friends with that day. I could hear that the campsite below us was still blasting their music and partying pretty hard, but I just tried to ignore it and go to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I was jolted awake. Parts of this are somewhat of a blur. All I know is that I sat straight up as soon as I heard the screaming and yelling coming from outside my tent. I quickly ran outside to find our campsite in chaos. One of my friends was clutching their chest. People were running around and screaming to call 911. I was quickly informed of what happened. Apparently, not long after I had gone to bed, the people camping at the site below us decided they weren't finished talking to Ben, and on their way up, they had encountered Lily and Derek walking back. Now, Derek and Ben are about the same height and have the same color hair, so they assumed that Derek was Ben and bottled both him and Lily over the head with a full glass bottle. I don't know if it was the same guys that showed up at our campsite, but I was told that everyone was sitting around the fire when 2 or 3 guys appeared from the darkness and walked over to them. One had a paring knife and the other had a butcher knife in their hands. Ben saw the knives and had gotten up to talk to them and had barely spoken a word when the guy with the paring knife stabbed him once in the chest. At the same time, some people from the campsite above had seen the guys coming and came down to help. One of the guys, Tim, was coming down the hill when the guy with the butcher knife ran up to him and stabbed him in the stomach. From there, sheer panic ensued. People called 911, but the ambulance was over half an hour away. This is where I came out of the tent. Tim's wound was bleeding profusely and he was losing blood way too quickly. His friends ended up putting him in the back of his car and speeding off to meet the ambulance halfway. Ben was also bleeding, but his wound wasn't as deep as Tim's, and we were able to keep him calm until an ambulance arrived. The guys with the knives ran off into the darkness back down to their campsite and took off in their Land Rover. My boyfriend at the time and I had gotten into his car and drove to the entrance to try and flag down the policemen on their way to the scene. Once they arrived, we were informed to stay in the car as they had released a K9 search unit to hunt down the people who stabbed our friends. By the end of the night, they had arrested the men. They had tried to flee by driving their vehicle across the lake bed where they got stuck in a muddy section of the lake. They were on a concoction of several drugs, as suspected. Luckily, both Tim and Ben survived, although Tim had lost a lot of blood and took a few weeks to recover from his wounds. Derek and Lily had huge goose eggs, and possibly one person had a concussion, but I can't recall. It was definitely the scariest thing I have ever experienced, and a few of us had to testify against them in court. I've attached an online article about it if you're interested in reading it. My husband and I went camping for the first time ever in Arizona as a part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool place that was on a mountain overlooking a beautiful landscape. It's next to a cliff and in a really isolated location. I'm talking like 20 miles out on gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. So we get there and set up our tent and hike a little bit and take some pictures of the surrounding area. We see a few cars parked around 2 tents and decide to stop and talk to the other campers nearby because we had heard that there was going to be a bad storm that night. These were 4 guys who were from Arizona, and they told us not to worry and that the storm didn't get that terrible around this area. That was all the persuading that we needed to stay. Later on, while walking a bit further down the campsite, we see a woman there with her dog and another older lady. We smile and wave and continue to hike down a bit further into the forest. Let me elaborate that because of the storm, we are one among maybe a total of 7 campers that decided to stay and withstand the night. We watch the sunset when we get back to our site, make sure our car was only a few yards away, and go into our tent when it gets too dark to see. There are no stars tonight due to the storm clouds, and it hasn't begun to rain yet, so we decide to try to sleep right away so that we could possibly sleep through the storm when it does hit. It is an insanely windy night, so it's hard to sleep, but eventually we get a bit of shut-eye. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. to the sound of some crazy thunder rolling through the mountains and the rain hitting down on our tent. I'm a little freaked out because they get a lot of flash floods out there, and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff. But I tell myself to try to sleep, and eventually I doze off again. It's 12 a.m. and I'm awake again. This time because I hear something heavy hitting the side of our tent. Like full on sounded like someone could have been punching our tent and sliding something down the side of it. I open my eyes and can't see anything. It's completely dark. No light whatsoever. The sound continues every couple of minutes, and at this point I am shitting bricks. Suddenly I hear footsteps right next to my side of the tent. They're slow but steady. I feel my entire body freeze up. I seriously start thinking about how this is it and I am going to die. My heart is beating so fast that I'm certain whatever is out there can hear it. Then whatever it is lets out a deep sigh right on the opposite side of the tent. I'm thinking it's a bear and realizing that I might actually have to face this thing. In a desperate call for my husband's mind-reading powers, I squeeze his hand really hard repetitively and he wakes up. But instead of reading my mind, he blurts out,
"What's wrong? Why are you squeezing my hand?"
Right as he says this, the footsteps stop. I don't hear the footsteps again, so after a while I break out of my frozen state and tell him what I heard. We decided it might have been an animal passing by. But whatever is hitting our tent continues every so often, and I'm starting to go a little insane from this night, wondering what is going on. We convince ourselves that it's just pines falling from the trees above us and try to sleep again. We just need to make it through one more night, and then we can laugh about all of this in the morning. A couple of minutes go by, and suddenly the tent caves in on my husband's right side, right on his head. He whispers that it feels like something is pushing the tent down. I feel my heart instantly sink. I'm freaking out, thinking it's a bear that just sat on his head, but he decides to push back, and we hear the familiar noise of something sliding off of our tent that we've been hearing for the past few hours. We then realize that it's been snowing outside and that the noise we heard hitting our tent was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Our tent is covered in thick ice, and my husband pushes the tent from the inside until all the ice slides off. Still determined to make it through the night and a little relieved that it was just ice and not a bear, we try to sleep and make it to sunrise. We keep on a small light that my husband luckily brought with him just to calm us down a little. Things are starting to seem normal again. We both close our eyes, and it's 3 a.m. at this point. Not even 30 minutes after we're settling down, my literal worst nightmare happens. Out of the pitch black night, we hear a woman screaming. We distinctly hear her say,
"What the fuck? Oh my god, what the fuck?"
followed by some other non-tangible words that sound something like, "Help." The way that she screams doesn't sound like anger. It sounds like pure terror and a sense of panic. My husband and I are both frozen, looking at each other. I quickly shut off our light and start panicking and asking what we should do, because what the fuck? How is this really happening right now? While we are trying to decide what to do for the next few minutes, we hear her again, but this time she is screaming,
"No, no, 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 no,"
as we hear a car speed off into the night. I'm in tears at this point. We have no idea what is happening. It's dead silent now, save for the icy rain hitting our tent. It definitely sounded like she wasn't in the car, but more like she was desperately yelling after it or begging not to be hurt. And this was the breaking point. Because I could take the bad weather. I could take the possibility of a bear outside my tent. I could even take the ice falling on our heads in one of the warmest states in America. But one thing I cannot and will not ever be able to handle is a screaming person in the middle of the pitch black woods at 3 a.m. We decide to get the fuck out of there and even contemplate leaving our tent and booking it to our car. But instead we try to stay level-headed and grab our valuables and put them in the car first. We frantically gather our things and stay close as we shuffle to our car. I close the door and keep the lights off for a while, scared to attract any unwelcome visitors. And while my husband goes back to grab the tent, I start the car and call 911. I tell them what I heard and where we are, and they say that they are sending someone to the campsite to make sure everything is okay. Only thing is, we are literally in the middle of nowhere, and it will definitely take them more than an hour to arrive. Not to mention the storm left those gravel roads in some pretty terrible conditions. So my husband and I decide to start driving, and it's like 3:30 a.m. now. As we drive out of the campsite, my husband notices one last eerie detail that stuck with me. The 4 guys that we had talked to earlier had left. All 3 of their cars were gone, while their tents remained. Whatever scared them off, they sure left in a hurry. It was only after we started driving that the thought occurred to me. Whatever was walking next to my tent may not have been an animal. It very well could have been someone lurking around in the dark who decided to go after the girl we had seen previously on our hike. I'm not sure what went down on that lone mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay. So, whatever was at our campsite that night terrorizing us all, let's not ever meet again. This is my first time posting, and this hiking story happened years before I was aware of missing 411 or any strange occurrences happening in the wilderness. I was hiking alone on a semi-popular trail in the Chuckanut Mountain Range in Washington State. Noting the Chuckanuts do have cougars, black bears, coyotes, etc., although I'm not sure that's too relevant to my story. I remember not seeing anyone for the entire hike, which was unusual for the area, but I didn't think too much of it. After reaching the viewpoint of this hike, an uneventful ascent, I turned around and was making my way down sometime in the late afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 p.m. About a quarter of the way down, I got that common silence falls over the forest, with even the light breeze seeming to stop. I turned around and noticed a fern on the ground was moving. I moved closer to see what the cause was, and there was nothing there, and that scared the shit out of me. This fern was standalone, like not in a thick patch of ferns like you commonly see them, not on a hillside, and I could see all around the fern, including the ground. I was thinking small animal, squirrel or something, but I don't know how to emphasize enough that there was nothing there that could have been hidden or that I couldn't see. It was slightly off the trail, like 3 feet, so I could circle it, and did exactly that. I don't know why I was so drawn to this in the first place, but it was just weird. After about 30 seconds of investigation, things get really fucking freaky. I start hearing a voice, not in English, but speaking in an Eastern European language, from what I assume. I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I got the chills and the other common feeling of someone or something watching me. The voice lasted for about 10 seconds, also like that feeling. It was coming from all around. At this point, I drew out my pistol because fuck that. I'm slowly backing away from the fern. The voice has stopped, but the forest is still dead. Now, I don't know if this was my instinct, a voice I actually heard, or an auditory hallucination from being so freaked out, but something said, "Run," like a whisper. So I followed this advice. I holstered my pistol and took off down the trail. I didn't see anyone else the entire time I'm sprinting down. I don't know what happened, and I haven't had any other occurrences out in the woods. I was theorizing after reading the 411 series. Someone maybe luring people in? I don't know if this is connected or some other rational explanation, but wanted to post it here for your thoughts. Also, the Chuckanut Mountain Range isn't quote-unquote deep woods, and I have friends who've told me of homeless people camping out there. I bring this up because a buddy of mine was essentially stalked by a man in a trench coat while running on a different loop. I know Paulides doesn't allude to serial killers, and I don't believe it's that either. I know he's starting to venture into some more urban areas in this blend of heavy forest between 2 reasonably populated areas, Bellingham and Burlington. Just throws a monkey wrench into my ideas of what could have caused this, and obviously the 411s. As always, some truly disturbing encounters. I don't know about you, but those stories are going to be cycling through my mind on my next camping trip, if there ever is one. For those interested, Missing 411 is a book series and a documentary following the strange disappearances happening in our national forests. The jurisdiction to cover these disappearances is in a gray area, which leads to issues and actually figuring out what is happening. There are also some very strange circumstances surrounding them. This happened around 4 years ago in middle school, grade 6, around when I was 10 or 11. Often our school would do fire drills 3 times a year and 1 lockdown drill so every student can be prepared for emergencies. This happened around mid-year when we'd already done our lockdown drill months ago. so when the specific siren went off, I knew it wasn't a drill. At the time, I was in the toilet when the sirens started blaring. Of course, I was scared, leaving myself locked in a stall. We were always told if we were in the bathroom, a teacher would come get us and take us to the nearest classroom for safety. I remember counting and waiting a few minutes for whatever teacher would find me, but none came. I decided to exit the bathroom and walk around in the yard a bit. The sirens were still going, so trying to hear for anything wasn't really an option. At the front of the school, there was a dirty man who was leaning on the fence, just staring towards the school, knife in hand. When he noticed me, he waved before entering the school, walking towards me. Of course, I started running away, heading towards the bins and hiding between those. He never found me, but I know he was arrested because my mom brought up the info on him recently, describing that he'd been watching the school every day in his car, and the reason the school went into lockdown was because they noticed him standing out front. And the reason why my mom only told me this info recently was because she thought I couldn't handle it back then. When I was young, from the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There was a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy. Because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting, as I got older, they really didn't pay as much attention as they should to where I would wander off. I would spend my days roaming around the yard, laying in the dirt, and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of the electric ones that you are probably picturing either. It was a damn fast gas-powered quad four-wheeler. Now at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child. But like I said, my parents were a bit reckless, and my dad just wanted me to have fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free ride to basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back. I started riding through the orchards behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became more brazen and a little older. I would ride down this dirt path that would lead past what I assumed was our neighbor's land and to a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little explorer. I honestly never contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment far away from my house without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones existed, is pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened, and it is not what the story is about. So one day, like every other day, I was riding far away from home and I passed by a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a wicker farmer's hat. I remember it vividly as it was the first person I had seen in all the time I had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes when he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I kept going and just forgot about it. On the way back home a couple of hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen the man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to be there. As I said, it had been hours. Yet, as the trees parted, there he was. I really didn't think it was too weird because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I kept driving, coming closer to where he was. He seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face like he was happy to see me. To my 10-year-old self, I just thought he was a friendly guy, so I waved at him as I passed by, and he waved back. I continued on my way and drove home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time had passed between then and the next time I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of days. Like usual, I took the same dirt road past the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about my previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile. This time, his smile seemed to be more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said,
That's a good idea, although you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It can be dangerous for a kid your age.
I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I felt uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, however, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered,
I heard they found a little boy out here, just around your age. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned.
I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported, or there had been a story in the paper, they definitely wouldn't have let me out anymore. Anyways, he continued.
Why don't you come with me, and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age.
It's okay. I have my quad right there. I'll just ride back.
I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black, and piercing into me. At this point, I was scared, and I knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way I was going anywhere with him. I got to my feet to start walking to my quad, to which the man said, Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck and I'll give you a ride back.
I don't see a truck,
I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of the situation.
Oh, it's right over there on my property. You can't see it from here,
he said, his smile widening.
It's really okay. I'll just go now,
I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm.
You really shouldn't be out here,
he said, staring me deep in the eyes.
It's really not safe for little kids.
Let me go, you're hurting me,
I shouted, starting to panic. But this only made him grip tighter.
Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kids out here all alone? Maybe you should come home with me and I'll take care of you.
At this point, I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out and I started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything, I just know I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, as his once toothy grin turned into a face of anger. He put his hand over my face and I took this opportunity to bite his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully, this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain.
You little shit, get the fuck over here,
he cried in anger. I knew I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet, as I was already starting to drive away. I punched it and noped the hell out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me, but I wasn't going to look as I could possibly crash and be SOL. I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest I had ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet as I was so afraid. I just kept bawling. I think I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day, I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think I started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about. Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking, and we lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently, I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never really asked because I tried not to think about it. So yesterday I went to her house and asked her if they found the guy, considering he had lived pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute as if pondering whether to tell me and said, "He didn't have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time they got there. They looked around the property and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. When they looked inside, they could tell that he had been staying there. Apparently, he left his stuff behind. We never told you this because you were way too young, but one of the things they found was a black grocery bag. It had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside." "Thanks, Mom, but did I really need to know that?" When I was about 10 years old, I shared a room with my older brother, who was about 15. We lived in a suburb area in New York, and not the greatest area, but not riddled with crime either. There are 2 windows in my room, one that overlooks the backyard and one that connects to the front porch. It came in quite handy for my brother to sneak out and meet with friends. If you step out of the window, you're on the porch, so anyone on the porch can access the window. I was never bothered by that thought because, quite honestly, it had never crossed my mind. My bed was touching this window while my brother's bed was perpendicular to mine. It was an odd setup, but that's besides the point. Now, this was before we had any sort of smartphone or laptop to keep ourselves occupied, so on nights when we weren't sleepy, we would stay up talking to each other and making up dumb games to pass the time. It took place during the summer. We stayed up into the late hours of the night, perks of having no school. It was probably around 2 a.m. and eventually we were playing a game where one of us was a goalkeeper and the other one was taking a shot, like football/soccer terms. We would both say at the same time either left, center, or right. If the goalkeeper guessed the same as the one taking the shot, he would get a point, and if the person taking the shot said a position other than what the goalie said, they got a point. We went for a couple of rounds of this, and I was beating his ass at it, even though that's irrelevant. I don't remember what round we were on, but we did our 3, 2, 1 countdown. My brother, the goalkeeper, said left. I, the shooter, said center. The voice from outside the porch window said left. Me and my brother froze. We had the shade down, but my mom had left the porch light on, so that was the only light illuminating our room. The dim porch light coming in from the borders of the shade. At the time, in my house was my mother on the opposite side of the house, my sister the room over, my dad in the basement, and me and my brother shitting our pants practically. We waited for what seemed like an hour, but was probably only 30 to 45 seconds, and we heard a giggle and a playful knock at the window.
Let's go another round. Come on, boys.
The voice said in a cheerful, playful tone. Honestly, I want to say it was a scary voice and sounded menacing, but it didn't. It sounded like a woman, not too old, but not too young, and it was just normal. Like a normal sounding voice. Nothing off about it besides where it was coming from and the time it came. Me and my brother were seriously freaked out, and I was about to break down because of how close I was to this woman. The thought that all I had to do was lift the shade and I'd be face to face with this person scared the shit out of me and made me go still and stiff as if I had just looked into Medusa's eyes. After a while of me and my brother not responding, my brother started slowly moving from his bed to the door as to not make any noise. As my brother was tiptoeing to the door, the sound of nails being ran down the window started. It was very slow from top to bottom. At that point, my brother made it to the door. He looked back at me and brought his finger to his lip, gesturing me to keep quiet. Once the nails stopped running down my window, I heard her light footsteps make their way off my porch and disappear. I laid there for an eternity, not moving until my brother returned and I saw my mom moving hastily by my door, making her way to the front door. The porch light flipped off and I was left in darkness with my brother waiting in the doorway for my mom's return. I heard my mom call my dad up and his groggy, annoyed footsteps coming upstairs. They talked and then came in me and my brother's room and we relayed what happened. Apparently, my mom caught sight of the lady turning out of our driveway on foot behind some tall bushes. Thank God we had a long driveway, otherwise my mom probably would have thought we were crazy. Considering no harm was done besides leaving me terrified of my window, my parents did not call the police. They just thought it was really weird and stayed up the rest of the night to make sure she didn't return. I'm 17 now. My brother is in college, so I have the room to myself. My bed still touches the window because I'm too lazy to move the rest of the furniture in my room so I can move my bed. The shade to that window has not been opened since that incident and probably never will be. This incident occurred when I was around 13 years old. I was going dress shopping for a wedding or something with my mom, my sister, my mom's friend, and that woman's daughter. My sister and the other two women rode together in one car while I rode with my mom in our car. When we arrived at our destination, a small mall somewhat in the middle of nowhere, the other members of our group headed on inside while my mom and I parked. When we got out of the car, we realized that the parking job was awful. So I held my mom's purse and stood next to the spot while she backed out and pulled back in. However, to two male bystanders, it must have appeared that my mother was leaving me. I noticed the two men when I got out of the car, but didn't think much of it. They were both tall and very skinny and both looked pretty ratty. I turned my back to them and watched as my mother backed out. I could hear them talking, but I didn't pay much attention to what they were talking about. Red flags only started going off when I realized they were walking towards me. I'm naturally a paranoid person, so this alone sent me into a panic. I tried to reassure myself. Surely they were only headed towards their car, which happened to be in my direction. They kept getting closer, but I was too scared to move. And then I heard it.
Grab her.
I whipped my head around to see the pair standing right behind me, one reaching for me. Right at that moment, my mother started to pull back into her spot and they booked it out of there, literally sprinting in the opposite direction. I told my mom about it when she got out of the car, and we spotted them speed walking behind the row of cars opposite to where we were. Their eyes were boring holes into me, and all my mother said was, "Wow, they really are staring at you." Thanks, Mom. So earlier tonight, my friend asked me to come over to his house. I wasn't doing anything, so I decided, why not? I got there and my two friends Sid and Liam were there. After a while, Mike showed up there too. We were just sitting around killing time and then eventually decided to go to Dunkin' Donuts. You may be wondering why get Dunkin' at 9:45 at night. Well, I love double chocolate donuts and I was hungry. Anyways, after we got Dunkin', I convinced my friends to go to the train tracks by my house. I know now that this was probably a horrible idea at the time, but as bored high schoolers, anything semi-thrilling is a blast to us, especially at night. Before I start telling the rest, I have to give you an idea of where the tracks are. I live in a pretty dense forest, so driving around at night and seeing around corners is hard. Over one of the roads to get into my neighborhood is a railroad bridge that's about 15 to 20 feet above the road. After you pull into my neighborhood, you take a right and then a left to get parallel with the railroad track. The track itself is on a big rock hill thing, again about 15 to 20 feet above the road. After going parallel along the road for about a quarter mile, you can either take a left to continue along the road, or left along a dirt road still parallel with the tracks. Then, after going along that road, you can either go left into my neighborhood, or right to get back along the dirt road again. Anyways, so my friends and I were driving into my neighborhood when we got around the area where you can take a left along the dirt road, or a left to continue down that road. This is where everything started to get kind of weird. We saw a car going kind of slow by that corner and slowly crept around it. We decided to drive around the corner and pull into a driveway to pretend we lived there. We did this because we didn't feel like letting people know we were planning on stopping by the tracks. After staying in the driveway for a few seconds, we noticed the car that passed us stopped and turned around. I pulled out of the driveway and went the way it came and went around 40 miles per hour in a 25. I had been reading Let's Not Meet earlier and was kind of creeped out for some reason by it turning around, although I had no reason at the time. After getting a good head start on him, I slowed down. We were halfway through the stretch of the road when Liam noticed that the car we passed up earlier was gaining on us and fast. I didn't think much of it, but he started to flash his brights at me, which was very unsettling considering the circumstances. The neighborhood I live in is probably the tamest town in the state, and stuff like this rarely happens, so my friends and I were understandably bothered by this guy. We drove on while he tailgated me, and I decided to go right back to the dirt road instead of towards my house. I pulled around and saw his car slow down at the intersection and then take a left. Boy, were we happy when that ass finally relented. We went along the dirt road and back to the area you can make the lefts mentioned before, since that was the only feasible way up there. We got out of the car and climbed up onto one of those metal things over the train tracks with the red and green lights. Sid, however, was having none of it and decided to sit in the car while we dicked around. After messing around on top of that, Liam, Mike, and I went to get Sid. We started walking down the railroad tracks, and about halfway there, we heard that all too familiar sound of a train horn in the distance. That's when we decided to book it back to the car. The whole time we were running, all we could hear was the train horn getting louder and louder. And since after the bridge the tracks turned right, we wouldn't know if the train was close until it was very close. After what seemed like forever, we reached the path to get off the hill and to our car. Sid, Liam, and Mike all wanted to just go back to Sid's house and wait until later to go back. When we got back, Liam, Mike, and I just talked about how cool it was up there and how we'd do it again. But Sid was done with the train tracks for a while. After trying to convince him, we decided that we were just going to go back and Sid could stay home. Mike, Liam, and I made it back to the left turn area with no incident and decided to try to get back to the bridge again. We made it there, just talked for about 10 minutes, then decided to head back. When we were almost there, we saw a truck pull around the corner that the car had come by, and just like the car, it slowed down around the corner. This was not an, oh, I'm not trying to crash slow. This was a, I'm looking for you slow. Mike whispered for us to get down, and without hesitation, we dropped down and watched. We knew something was awry because it stopped at the left turn area with its lights pointed in our direction. My car was parked down the road a bit, so I have no idea if the car was looking at us or at my car. Either way, it did the same thing as the car and turned around to head the other direction. We knew something was up, so instead of staying on the tracks for a bit longer, we decided to dip. The only way back was either through the dirt path or the way the truck went, and we didn't have much time because Liam had to be back by 11:30. I just decided to go the fastest way and follow where the truck went, and then through the dirt road to get to Mike, Sid, and Liam's neighborhood. We were all a little shaken up because we thought we would get into trouble for something. I had just been down this road earlier when we all went back to Sid's house and thought this night of adventure was going to be over. We reached the end of the road and saw two vehicles parked along the road. Strange, we thought, because they weren't there when we dropped Sid off. After passing them, I realized they were a car and a truck. The exact same two that had been at the corner by us. This is where I started to panic, because I knew something was up. No one ever goes back there because there's no real reason. Only in my case was it faster to go on a shitty dirt road with potholes everywhere. I sped up and got to Sid's fast as I could while not looking panicked. I dropped off Mike and Liam, and Mike offered to drop Liam off on his moped. I know that sounds strange or not realistic, but for some reason Mike's family has a moped. In fact, I just found out that he has two. I drove home and didn't bother going back on the dirt path and went around a different route. For me, my night was over. For Mike, though, things were about to take a turn. About a half hour after getting home, I got a flurry of texts from Mike about what had just happened. Apparently, after dropping off Liam, he started to moped home when the truck from before started to follow him. He said at first he was far away, but then the truck came in very close to him and followed him towards his house. I have no idea why he thought to do what he did, but apparently he kept on driving past his house and lost him somehow, then walked his moped home, or something along the lines of that. It was through the Snapchat texting thing, so unfortunately I don't have a reference, but he said when he got inside he saw the truck just sitting outside of his neighbor's house, and after a few minutes drove off. I have no idea who these people are or why they were following us, but weird, stalkery car people, let's not meet. So this is a story that happened to my mom's friend in Korea about 10 years ago. Every time I hear this story, I still get the chills. My mom's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband worked during the days. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got into the elevator in her building. When she got on, she noticed that there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low so she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy, and she made her daughter stand to her side, furthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was that when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that he was carrying something wrapped inside a newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in her head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend she was calling home to her husband, who was obviously really not at home and at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm in the elevator about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" And making it seem like her husband was waiting at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, I think she lived on like the 12th floor or something, she quickly got off and grabbed her daughter and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got off on her floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When she got to her door, she started to bang on it and shout, "Hey, Yebo, I'm home, please open the door." Yebo means husband or dear, and kind of pretended like he was coming to answer the door. Upon seeing this, the man in his yellow raincoat started to walk away back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far away enough, my mom's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open the door's passcode thingy. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea, and started to frantically punch in her key code. But the problem was that the buttons would make a sound, so the man knew that no one was going to answer the door for her, and he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mom's friend at this point was practically screaming, and when she finally got her door to open, the first thing she did was throw her daughter in through the door. When she got in herself, she saw that the man was pretty much inches from the door, but she managed to shut it and lock it before he could wedge his hand or weapon into the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away back towards the elevator. Several months later, my mom's friend was watching the news, and there was coverage on the capture of a serial killer named Yoo Young-chul, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mom that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the two familiar yellow raincoat and hat that he was wearing when apprehended. Here's a note from what the wiki page says that the poster linked. Yu Young-chul, born April 18, 1970, is a South Korean serial killer and self-confessed cannibal. Although he admitted to murdering 21 people, mostly prostitutes and wealthy old men, the Seoul Central District Court convicted him of 20 murders. One case was dismissed on a technicality. Yu burned 3 and mutilated at least 11 of his victims, admitting he ate the livers of some of them. He committed his crimes between September 2003 and July 2004 when he was arrested. Yu explained his motives in front of a TV camera, saying, "Women shouldn't be sluts, and the rich should know what they've done." I was about 15 at the time, with my brother 17, and it was pretty late at night. Now, my grandparents' property is surrounded by woods on 2 sides, the left leading into a deep forest of evergreen, and ending at a lake with the other houses within throwing distance. I've grown up my whole life in those woods, seen many of critters, and was never really scared of them. They were more of a place of comfort and aloneness I liked. But I digress. Back to the story. My brother and I were walking up the long driveway that ended at the road because we kept hearing noises like moving branches by the tree line and wanted to check it out. We both knew whatever is in the woods, be it a raccoon, possum, coyote, whatever, that logically we could easily overpower and kill it. On our way back from investigating, I heard walking behind us, and I turned around to see. It was pretty dark, and the only thing we had for a light was my phone, which wasn't much. All I could see was 2 bright eyes staring back, maybe 3 or 4 feet from the ground. I don't know what it was particularly, but even now I'm thinking about just those eyes, and its presence filled me with the most horrific dread imaginable. It's like all my blood turned to ice and I couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just basic instinctual fear, but absolute dread. I immediately grabbed my brother's arm and ran as fast as I could to the porch, which has a light that shines about 10 feet into the yard. Whatever this thing was followed us, and when I made it to the porch and turned around, it had stopped just outside the light. Just enough to see those fucking eyes. The way it swayed almost made me vomit. I've never seen any animal sway like that and move its head so oddly. This thing was too large to be a rabid raccoon or coyote. My brother and I quickly got inside and turned off all the lights and hid under our blankets. So I live in a town of around 60,300 people and have been living and working here for 1.5 years. I don't know many people here as I work all day and have schoolwork in my free time. Because of this, I've been trying to meet new people and found a Facebook group with women wanting to hang out. One was suggesting a pre-party before going out, and we were 6 girls in total. At around 3 a.m., 3 of us decided to go home. One took a taxi and the other one lives like 3 minutes away from me, so we walked. We were talking and laughing for a few minutes before she went inside and I started to walk home rather happy and still a bit drunk. I suddenly noticed footsteps and got a bit paranoid, as you do being a woman in her early 20s walking home in the middle of the night. Like 50 meters further ahead, there's a public swimming pool and they still had lights on, so I decided to leave the sidewalk because usually people are just on their way home themselves and will just keep walking. Not in this case, though. As I reach the entrance with all the lights and turn around, this guy is literally 3 steps behind me. I asked him why he's following me, and he just mumbled something I couldn't make out. Could be an immigrant, though, so maybe he doesn't know Danish. I told him that he shouldn't be following me and that I'd like for him to keep going. No response. I then told him that I don't like being followed and please move on. He just smiled a creepy smile and out of nowhere grabbed my hair on the back of my head and pulled me towards him harder than I thought possible for his size. I fell on top of him and he got knocked out when he hit the pavement. Idiot. I ran across the parking lot to the road at a safe distance where I called 112 emergency while I could still keep an eye on him. Really wanted to just run home, but also I was terrified that me landing on him might kill him or whatever. Shock makes you think weird things. He attempted to get up a few times when I decided to run, but saw the lights from the ambulance come down the road, so I stayed and one of them came to check up on me while we waited for the police to arrive. I'm fine. I've got a sore scalp and a bruise on my left arm where I landed on him, and I'm sure he's got the biggest headache ever. Karma is a bitch, and here I thought I'd run out of dumb luck a long time ago. This was back in October 2018 when I had accompanied my mom to a clinic in a small town about an hour away from Frankfurt. I'm in my late 20s and female. We were there for about 2 weeks while my mom underwent treatment for cancer. Unfortunately, soon after arriving, she experienced a lot of pain in her leg, and we later found out that the cancer had spread there and her leg could break at any wrong step. This meant that if I was going to see anything, I had to go alone. This was fine as the town we were in was extremely small and filled mostly with the old and sick. There was a larger town only about a mile away up and over a fairly steep hill and a large park in between. It was about noon and my mom wasn't going to need me to be around, so I decided to go for a walk around the park. To get there, I just had to walk down the path across a street lined with inns and cafes on the side leading to the park. There are twisting paths crisscrossing each other, a lot of benches, a couple of fountains, and 1 or 2 community buildings. I chose a path that would take me right beside an underground fountain about as deep as my shoulders. I'm 5'7", with steps leading down to the spout. It was there that I first saw him. I was heading almost directly toward the fountain when a man's head pops up looking directly at me. I looked back at him for a second thinking I had surprised him just as much and we'd do the normal look away quickly thing. I was the only one who looked away. When I looked back, I realized he was still watching me, and then I noticed he had one arm crossed over his chest and moving as though he was touching himself. As soon as I realized this, I looked away and changed my direction to give him a wide berth. I was so stunned and in disbelief that I convinced myself that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with me, and that as long as I kept walking, he'd go back to being weird all by himself. I turned down a path that, for that immediate area, was wide open. I was still close to the cafes and inns, and the occasional other person also taking a midday walk. I was almost to an area that would take the path through patches of woods, which would also take me out of the public eye, when I looked back to see if the guy was still at the fountain, but he was gone. Surprised, I quickly did a circle and noticed he had taken off, doing a wide loop that left a lot of opportunity for us to cross paths again if I didn't change directions. Once again, I couldn't believe it. I thought, it's the middle of the day, we're in a quiet but not unpopulated town about a mile away from a larger one. There's no one here but old and sick people. There's no way a predator would be here, now, hunting me. But I still stopped and decided to change directions again. This time, my dumbass decides to take a tiny path that would lead me to the base of the hill that would go over to the larger town and was heavily wooded. I get up to where the trees started and decide to look again. That's when I notice that he had also changed his direction and was practically jogging away from me. I look back up the path and realize that continuing would leave me completely alone and vulnerable, and even though I didn't know where it led, I had a fairly good idea that the path the guy was jogging up would eventually connect to this path in the woods, because they all did. So I stood at the end of the path and waited until the guy was out of sight before I turned around and headed up the opposite direction through the grass of a pretty wide open portion of the park. I got to where I was a safe distance away and pulled out my phone to start recording myself. I figured it would look just like I was video chatting with someone. This was when it was shown without a doubt that this guy was after me, because not long after I made it across the park, but to where I could still see the path up the hill, he comes down the very same path, looking side to side, looking for me. He eventually spots me again. I had very bright dyed red hair and was pretty easy to spot in such a wide open area. It's at this point I feel safe enough because there are people nearby and I'm within running distance of the town should this guy book it towards me. And I keep wandering around, testing to see how far this guy will go. He keeps following me, trying to stay out of sight, because at one point I turn around suddenly and watch him sprint back into some trees until eventually I go up a hill that has zero cover for him to use, and I lose track of him. I continued on to explore a different small town, making sure I'm always in a public space and easily seen, but I never saw him again. Trust your gut. My head was telling me there was no way this could be happening to me, and I almost tested it by walking up into the woods. But my gut screamed bad idea, and I couldn't be more relieved I listened. Trust your gut.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us.
While Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface, Neil switched to the medical channel and spoke directly with the chief medical officer, saying, they're here, they're parked on the side of the crater, they're watching us.
2, 1, 0.
Is there anything scarier than unknown danger? Than something unexplained happening to you? This episode's stories are true encounters with the unknown, the unexplained, the otherworldly. Tonight, we are leaving Earth, leaving time. Welcome to another episode of
The Nightmare Society.
Alright, so this happened when I was about 9 or 10, and I've spoken about it to my family and friends, but I've never really been able to figure out what really went down. My parents and most of my buddies just think that I was dreaming or experiencing sleep paralysis because of how active I can be when I sleep talking, walking, etc. I live in a quiet, gated community, and after 10 p.m. there isn't that much activity as everyone is usually at home. My house is 2 stories and my room is on the 2nd floor. In my room I have one large window that faces the street, and I often sleep with the blinds open so that the sun will wake me when it rises. Now, on this night, I was sleeping pretty soundly until I was woken up by a terrifying metallic sound. I'm 22 now, so the details are a little fuzzy, but I remember it sounding kind of like a garbage truck and a leaf blower combined, but about 10 times louder, and it sounded as if it was right outside my window. Remember, I'm on the 2nd floor. I woke up in a panic, and when I looked out my window, all I saw was darkness. The only issue is that whenever I would look out my window at night, normally there would be a glow of streetlight or some moonlight. Never just pitch black. The sound continued, and of course, as a child, I screamed out to my mother in fear. I clearly remember her walking into my room with such a calm demeanor. It was like she didn't even hear the noise. I kept asking her, actually yelling, what the noise was, but she simply said, "It's okay, everything is fine," as she closed my blinds and walked out of the room. After this, I don't remember falling asleep, but I awoke in my bed around 10 a.m. the next morning, which is much later than I usually wake up. I did remember the events of the night prior and confirmed it to myself when I noticed that my blinds were indeed closed. When I went downstairs to eat breakfast with my family, I immediately asked my mother about what happened. She then told me that she never went into my room that night and didn't hear me call for her or any loud noises. I asked my brother, whose room is right next to mine, if he heard anything, and he also said that he was undisturbed during the night. They all told me that it was probably just a nightmare, but it seemed so real, and I remember leaving my blinds open before I went to sleep. I tell this story every once in a while, and everyone tells me the same thing. But after some research and digging through subs, I was wondering if maybe I was abducted. I've had a couple weird experiences with the paranormal, but I never considered that it could have been something alien that happened that night. What do you guys think? About 8 or 9, and my mom tells me we are going on a day trip to meet her high school friend. Cool. I grabbed my Game Boy Advance because I know my mom's friend has kids my age and wanted to show them up in the racing game I had. I overheard this from my mom talking with her friend at her house. They told me to leave the room because they needed to talk about adult things. Little, innocent, curious me wonders what exactly are adult things that I can't hear. Were they gonna throw some new juicy cuss words out? Well, Mom's friend had a little girl who would sleepwalk at night. It started when they moved into their new house in Northern California. It was a suburban area, but not too suburban. New neighborhood with a lot of empty homes and forest patches in between each community. She was about 4 years old, and they found her one night in the backyard just sitting there. After that incident, they decided they needed to lock her in the room at night and bar up her windows so that she doesn't end up in the woods nearby or anywhere besides her room, really. Mom's friend and husband wake up to a loud boom on the side of the house in the middle of the next night. Felt like something hit the house because everything shook. They check on their boys. They're good. They didn't hear anything and they go back to sleep. They check on their daughter, unlock the door, and realize she isn't in her room. They start to freak out, then hear a knock at the door. They open it. It's the effing sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter. They ask her where she's been, and she said with the men, and points down the street. Pissed off, Dad sees 2 guys in coats walking down the street. He yells at them and starts sprinting at them. Mom's friend said coat guys didn't react at all. Coat guys turn the corner. Dad turns the corner, and they're gone. Mom and Dad check the locks and the windows. No tampering. They notify the police, who pretty much say there's not much they can do but keep an eye out. Sleepwalking 4-year-old daughter is fine. Isn't scared at all. Just tired and goes back to bed. After that, my mom didn't understand why I was scared as hell that night. She believes the girl was abducted but refuses to tell me what happened. Even my dad tells me that he can't tell the story. Says it's for my mom to share if she wants it shared. But overhearing this when I wasn't supposed to hear it had me tripped out as a kid. Watched The Fourth Kind later in life and was scared of that movie too. friends all laughed at me saying it was stupid, but they didn't know about my mom's friend's story. This next one is a comment in reply to a post. Holy shit, something similar happened to me back in 2005. I was living out in the boonies with my mom. I was 15 years old. I had been talking with a girl on and off for weeks, and I was on the phone with her. It was just before dark when this chick was telling me that if I come over to her house, she will sneak outside to hang out with me as soon as her parents go to bed. Luckily, she only lived like 2 miles away, and I had a bike. Horny teenage me didn't take long to decide right then that I was going to make that trip. Luckily, my mom always went to bed super early as well. She texts me sometime after 10 p.m. that her parents went to bed. It's on. I leave for her house. As I'm riding my bike down these dark country roads, I see almost exactly what you described you saw. Orange, glowy lights in a triangular formation. They were just hanging there, still. I stopped for a second to get a better look because there were some trees obstructing my view and they started looking bigger the more I looked at them. I started to feel this really weird sensation that I can only describe as similar to vertigo. I completely black out. I wake up and I'm still on the side of the road, but not where I was before. I got super confused and couldn't quite figure out where I was for a minute. I pull out my phone to look at the time. It's dead. My bike is nowhere to be found. I start heading down the road in what I thought was the direction I came and suddenly realized where I was. I was in the opposite direction of my house from where I started. Like I was on the same road, just on the other side of it. I turn around when I realize this and run home. I get home and plug in my phone. It's like 2 a.m. and I have a bunch of missed calls and texts from that chick asking where I'm at. I go to bed and sleep like shit for the rest of the night. The next day I call that girl and I tell her what happened. She sounds skeptical. I ask her what time she called me the first time last night after I left. She said she called me at around 11 p.m. and it wouldn't go through. I left sometime after 10. I know my phone was at nearly full battery because it was on the charger before I left the house. I do find my bike later that day in the same place I remember stopping. It was just laying there on the side of the road. I remember having really crazy dreams and a bad headache for a couple of weeks after this happened. You know, after the first couple of weeks, I never really had dreams much anymore. I still don't. Not sure if it's related at all, though. I can't say for sure it was aliens or abduction or whatever, but I'll be honest. I'm not normally an anxious guy, but being outside alone at night has creeped me the fuck out ever since. Staring into the night sky gives me anxiety when I'm by myself now. Fuck everything about that night. I'm not sure I want to know what happened. I haven't really told anyone about this memory. It has stayed with me since it happened what is somewhere close to a decade ago. I was probably 9 years old. Completely normal day, and then I go to sleep. I wake up in the middle of the night despite normally being a heavy sleeper. I don't know why, but I immediately decide moving an inch would be a terrible idea. so I stay still and shut my eyes tight. I don't know why. Then I feel something. You know how you can feel what's happening around you even if you're not looking, as long as you're paying close enough attention? Imagine that, except amplified by about 400%. I could feel two presences in my room. Not near my door, no, but right next to my window on the opposite side of the room. I kept my eyes shut tight, but it wouldn't have mattered because it was dark as dark could be anyway. After remaining near my window for however long, I began to feel like they knew I was awake. Then they started moving over to me. I can see their exact path that they took through my room in my mind based on what I felt. Almost comparable to how you might imagine Toph would see in Avatar. Adrenaline-fueled heightened senses, I suppose. They both stand right in front of my bed. I'm laying on my side facing toward them. The one closer to my head bends down and gets near my face. I don't hear anything. I can only feel them. They stay like this for another short while, and I am panicking beyond belief, concentrating on keeping my mind in check so that I can stay alive. I pray to God that they go away, and then peace. I have no idea what happened after that. I don't even remember waking up, despite this memory of the encounter and peace that followed it being extremely vivid. I had ruled it off as demons, as that falls in line with my beliefs, but after reading a few other encounters, I don't know what to think. I would not believe in aliens if not for this experience, and the next ones. The same year, perhaps 5 months before or 5 months after, I was taking out the trash, and once I got to the end of my driveway and dropped off the cans, we had a really long driveway. I looked up to search for the two dippers, as I always liked to do. I didn't expect to see about 5 shapes in the air. One, which took up maybe 1/12 of the circumference of the sky, if that makes sense, was composed of 4 bright lights assembling what was perhaps a trapezoid-esque shape. It was emitting what appeared to be similar to a headlight on a car, except huge, of course. It was stationary and revealed no stars behind it. To the right, there were 2 big, bright, stationary lights. Seemed more like individual ships, much larger than stars. Between them was a moving assembly of 3 red lights forming a perfect triangle going up, I guess. It almost looked like it was following the 5th entity, which I think was just one of our satellites. Small, fast, zipping on by. I would have thought the triangle could have been an airplane, of course, but it looked way too big for how it was moving and how far away it appeared to be. I've seen this triangular ship 2 other times as well. Once when I was even with other people, though it was too fast for anyone else to see it. We were in a moving car and it went out of view. I have no explanation for these events, only the vivid memories and assurance that I didn't dream these events up. On top of these experiences, I also noticed another similarity between me and people who claim to have been abducted. A strange fascination, almost obsession with aliens when they were younger, which suddenly stopped, at least for a while. I've also felt that odd sensation that many others have expressed when certain things are shown or brought up. You begin shaking, quivering, and tearing up. You don't know why, but you know you have to get away from what triggered it, which in my case is 100% every time related to aliens being shown or discussed in the media. Doesn't happen every time aliens are brought up, but when it happens, it's when aliens are brought up. Am I blowing all of this out of proportion?
Sweet.